This is called The Big Hill. It's going to take 25 minutes or so of your life for you to hear about it. So if you don't have that kind of time, please try one of the shorter stories on this site. The story which follows is true. The names have not been changed because the characters are not innocent. The immediate location for the story is in the countryside, a modest distance west of Ithaca, New York. I do have an urge to tell you that for all of us, any specific location for any story ultimately includes all previous locations for the character in question, but I don't want to wander too far too early in the narrative. In any event, out there west of Ithaca, there is a high glacial hill. I think it's called a moraine, whatever that is. Whatever it is, it's a big one. And it is a significant hill for the reason that its southern decline drains to the Susquehanna and Chesapeake Bay and out into the mild Atlantic, while the northern decline flows north to Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River and out to the bountiful fishing shoals of Nova Scotia. Again, I digress, since none of that has anything to do with the story we're telling here. For some reason, it's hard to get started with this one. So here we go. The main character here, who is me, is a lowly student at one of the colleges in that upstate icebox of a town, which looks so green and idyllic if you happen to pass through there on a summer campus visiting trip. The reason I focus on that icebox thing is because of the February date on which this story takes place. Let it be known that the weather was unusually warm for such a date, up near 30. That's after 6 weeks of little or no variation of Fahrenheit degrees around the number 4. And that sudden warmth may or may not explain the 7 inches of sheet ice over every rock-hard road or ground surface for 100 miles. It may or may not, because I am not and never became a meteorologist, but I was, though I never later became, one of the best damn 4 a.m. delivery men of the Sunday Ithaca Journal to the back country of upstate New York who ever lived. This delivery service required, of course, a car, with which I had been provided by the timely or untimely, however you want to consider it, given the rest of this story, death of my great Aunt Louise. Some may say that that car was not the optimal vehicle for my 80-mile backwoods paper delivery route, particularly in winter. The car was, to put an exact point on it, a 1965 green and white Rambler American Classic with the kind of a wheelbase that felt like you were sliding on ice even on a hot summer day. The other notable feature of that car was that it had one of the early talking chips, which would make helpful remarks through the radio like, "Your fuel is running low," in a calm but slightly threatening tone. There was no connection between those helpful remarks and how high or low your fuel was actually running. But really, that chip was pretty advanced for the time. The voice sounded to me quite a bit like Bob Barker on the old TV show Truth or Consequences. The tone was both an admonition and a congratulation, as if I had won something. "You should check your oil." The more it talked, the more certain I became that it probably was Bob Barker. He must have sold his voice out on a side gig, like today's influencers. I guess he just wasn't sure that TV thing was going to pan out. Anyway, between him and Charles Osgood and Paul Harvey on the radio, I never really felt totally alone out there. In fact, that one Paul Harvey fishing pun about a billfold dropped overboard and being visibly and mockingly bounced from the fins of one fish to another has always stuck with me. Only known instance of carp to carp walleting ever recorded. I'll just let that sit for a minute, as Paul did. Carp to carp walleting. Only known instance. Billfold dropped over the side of a fishing boat, fish batting billfold back and forth down on the lake bottom, carp to carp walleting. Talk about straining to set up a punchline. Almost as much trouble as straining to set up a story about a newspaper delivery incident in the winter countryside a little ways west of Ithaca, New York. All right, back to the papers. It was well known back at the ramp that I was the Billy the Kid of journal delivery. I could roll up and fire those papers one-handed out the shotgun side window into those red plastic tubes with deadbolt accuracy. I could count the number of times on one hand I had to stop the car and get out to retrieve a paper that had been shot wide of the target. I left those tubes humming on their poles as I thundered past. A trailer camp with a line of 10 or 12 tubes sounded like a country club skeet range as I slammed those babies home. Pop, 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 pop. I was the best, and there was no known remote mountaintop shack that did not receive a timely paper through the blinding sleet from me, the Billy the Kid of Ithaca Journal delivery. Okay, so back to the morning in question. I left the downtown ramp at 3:45 a.m. sharp and headed out Route 13 for the hinterlands. I noticed right away that the sheet of ice, even on the main highway, had not yielded in any way to the few passing vehicles. Did I mention that Molly, that's what I called Aunt Wheezy's garrulous heap with wheels, Molly drove in the snow like a cork surfboard in a Maui riptide. But with 400 pounds of bagged sand and 20 bales of thick Sunday journals in the trunk, she could lay into the ice as good as many. Already there were a few early risers wallowing in the ditch like Sherman tanks and North African sand traps, though most of those tanks probably didn't have Molly's bald treads and didn't prefer rampaging down a straightaway backwards as Molly was inclined to do on the ice. When the car mentioned your speed seems excessive, I just snickered. How the hell would that chip know that 5 miles per hour was excessive on that ice? I felt relaxed enough to contemplate once again the fact that the speech chip function on that vehicle was on the same fuse as the headlights, thus dooming me to an eternal entanglement between safe driving in the dark and blissful silence. Anyway, here's how it came down on that day. It was dark, but it was bright. The sheet ice lay across the land like it was lit from below. I had had a hell of a time delivering the first 30 papers, sliding all over the place, but nothing seemed all that bad compared to what I knew was coming. The big hill was ahead. I considered skipping the 9 or 10 papers at those higher elevations. Could have just gone by on flat Route 13 and bypassed the whole hill, delivered the bales to the stores and called it a morning. But Lord, did those customers scream when they didn't get their Sunday paper. There were times back at the ramp when you had to go back out to deliver a single paper before you got paid out for the day. Besides that, well, the paper must be delivered. That's the way it was. It might have been like that much longer, as the campuses soon exploded, but that's the way it was then in 1968. I had been planning my hill attack for some miles ahead. Blessedly, the road up the big hill was straight, so I figured I could conquer it with sheer speed. Nobody had told Aunt Wheezy that she didn't need a V8, and that Rambler could hit 120 if it had a reason. This day, we had a reason. The only constraint was a narrow one-lane green metal bridge over the river at the bottom of the grade. So I had to keep Molly under 40 as we eased into the turn for the hill. As soon as I cleared the bridge, there was another curve I had forgotten about that almost sent me into a small white house that I had also forgotten about. So I spent a little bit of my wind-up time in the guy's front yard, but kept up pretty good speed. And now I was moving. I could see the road ahead gleaming wide and straight in the snow brightness, and I saw that strip of sheet ice ahead like an uphill runway for launch. I hit the grade at 80 and flattened the needle to the right past 110 in that long rectangle of speedometer where no one was ever rightfully permitted to go. The grade was the better part of a mile at 30 degrees, and the Molly rocket covered it in what seemed like about 20 seconds. We were flying, Molly and me, straight up into the sky. There was no doubt we were gonna make it. And that's when I made my mistake. I eased off the gas just a bit. I have thought a lot over the years about that easing off as I got near the top. It was not a sense of total mastery, like no hands on a bike, not like that. Molly was not designed to go that fast, and a wise man does not overplay a lucky hand. I've even revisited the site to assess the instinctive danger of overshoot. That's right. Some caution was required. Indeed, the road does curve strong right, not far over the brow. I knew that, though it had never come into play before, and there had to have been some danger at a too high speed on an ice sheet, suddenly liberated from an uphill. Deep inside, I would have known that. But if you listen to the rest of the story, I think you, like I do, will agree with the following lifelong guideline. A little bit extra is an awful lot better than just a touch short. I seemed to have plenty to spare as I got to the brow, like I said, but the simple physical fact is I didn't quite make it. That, when all is said and done, is the complete analysis. The bald tires were still turning quite rapidly, really. It seemed like there was speed to burn, but the upward motion had stopped. Many times I have thought, in retrospect, if I had just stepped out of the car, would that have given us enough speed to cover that last bit? Was it 6 inches? It seems like I could have nudged it across with one hand. It's pretty flat near the top. But in fact, we just sat there, Molly and me, and I gave her more gas, which maintained our position. And then I gave her a lot more gas, and still we held. Maybe if I'd given her more gas sooner. But then we started slowly back. The 400 pounds of sand in the trunk, plus many bales of journals, were pulling us back. It was slow at first, very slow. There was still hope at that time. And then it was too fast to get out. I opened the door, but we were already going too fast. And then we were going really fast, back down that long hill. I had quit giving her gas and tried to guide her, hoping for some kind of purchase on the shoulder, but that had no effect. And then we were moving, sometimes straight back, sometimes sideways, and then I started thinking about the green metal bridge far away down in the valley behind us. And then I remembered the curve, and I thought I would probably end up in the living room of the guy in the little white house. It was bright as day because of the reflected light, but far too early for the resident to be up and at him. I would probably kill him in his bed. Killed while sleeping by a rogue green Rambler and a voice calmly saying, "Your vehicle has left the road surface." What a way to go. And then we went into the ditch, which was both a relief and a disappointment. I should have mentioned that there were quite substantial drainage ditches on both sides of the grade, maybe 3 feet deep. Very much enough to jam a car crooked and hopelessly stuck for many hours. I regretted it, but was also grateful that the downward, backward journey had come to an end. Nope. Did I mention that a half-foot of sheet ice covered the entire world? The car went into the ditch and popped up the other side like a beach ball in a swimming pool and landed with a clank in a weedy field and took off sideways down a steep slope toward a distant line of trees. Before I had a chance to even think for a second, I was already 100 feet off the road and sliding fast. I spent a lot of time in the next few moments braking and turning the wheel in various directions, trying to guide the slide. That, of course, was useless. I was in a pasture that had turned quite steep, and I couldn't keep the car from whipping around sideways or backwards or sometimes even forwards. But I kept on steering and braking. That's what you do. In no time, I saw a barbed wire fence ahead and realized I was going to slam into it at 40 miles an hour. I grieved for the undelivered journals, the long walk for a phone, the endless wait for a tow. But no, at the last microsecond, the car whipped dead left and shot backwards through a gateless gap in the fence, and we rifled on to a second pasture that was even steeper than the first. I could see tight contours below as if on a snow-covered giant topo map, and down we went. I was going 50 for sure and spinning and sliding like a runaway NASCAR on a vertical Daytona 500. Weeds and bushes were slapping the sides of the Rambler, even the windows. I thought of bailing out. Wildly, I opened the door and saw that the ground was passing at fatal speed and returned to my steering, which was useless. This was going to be a bad wreck, no doubt about it. Molly zipped around and headed frontways down a steep bank as if dropped from an airplane. You hear about wrecks in slow motion, not this time. Through the windshield, I saw a fast approaching stone building, some sort of abandoned pump house with massive blocks of granite, short and solid as the bulwark abutment on a major bridge. Madly, I thought, where is the Bob Barker voice warning? Why isn't the chip yelling, "Danger, danger, you should change your course setting"? My only chance was to somehow take a ricochet blow on the left side of the pump house and hope we didn't catch fire. I tried to guide left. Either that or something else spun the car wildly right, and we missed the pump house by a mile. We dropped down a 20-foot bank and belly flopped into a huge pile of downed brush. But Molly chopped through that like a grain combine through ripe corn, and I was launched onto a somewhat flat meadow and seemed to slow. Is it over? Is this it? I bobsled down a mountainside and end up in a one-car auto dump graveyard a mile off any known highway, and this is where Aunt Wheezy's green Rambler will melt into the ground to be discovered by future auto-paleontologists. And they will find a skeleton reading bale upon bale of undelivered Sunday Ithaca journals, all saying exactly the same thing. At that point, the car was yanked into the trees by what felt like a steel cable. I guess the car had been moving the whole time, just slower, and it seemed like we were standing still. But we sure weren't standing still now. Pine trees and lanes were whipping by like phone poles on a Kansas freeway as we dropped and then were uplifted on what felt like the curled up business end of a ski jump. We flew into deep pine foliage which seemed well off the ground, and the brush scratching noises went silent as liftoff was achieved. It all went white as the car whomped through some kind of deep snowbank and then launched horizontally out into open space. I had long ago given up and was simply waiting for the crash and roll. I had heard that you never remember the circumstances of a bad wreck. Memory is blotted out, like you never hear the bullet that kills you. The car seemed to touch down like a 737 on a snowy runway. Nothing unusual about the landing. We skidded an amazingly far football field or so and slowed to a stop. That was it. We were stopped, and I was still gently alive. Ahead was a lot of open space, and in the distance a low hill. And suddenly I knew where I was. I had slid out into the middle of a frozen tributary of the Susquehanna River. It was the flattest place I had been in quite some time. It really seemed quite reasonable. I simply opened the door and got out and stood there. I was wearing my winter boots. You never know, delivering papers, when you're going to have to get out of your car. And now I'll tell you the most remarkable thing of all. The headlights were still on. They hadn't been busted or disconnected. The two narrow V's of light pierced out toward the distant far shore. And that could only mean that the voice could come on at any time. Your vehicle is not authorized for ferry service at this time. For that and no other good reason, I reached in and shut them off. The ice seemed very solid, but again, for no good reason, I walked back to the near shore from which upper deck I had recently been launched. I didn't seem particularly shaken. I can't even remember now if I had ever buckled and unbuckled the pitiful lap belt that came with the old '65 model Rambler. I glanced up the hillside, which I had gouged down, and I thought walking back up there would take all day, even if it was possible. I walked back out to the car, again assessing that the river ice was frozen thick beyond all danger to me or Molly. I got to the car and was glad I had turned the lights out. I didn't want to hear the voice. Really? You think this is a proper parking place? Please relocate your vehicle away from the river surface. So there I was, a mile at least off the roadway, beyond the reach of all humanity, not to mention some kind of tow truck. I'd be lucky if anybody would ever even find me or Molly out there. I wouldn't even know how to tell anybody how to get there. And that's when I thought of it. Maybe you've thought of it too. We've all seen pictures of trucks pulling ice fishing cabins out onto frozen lakes. Vehicles can travel on ice. It's not that unusual. I got in and turned the key as if I thought the engine would catch. And it did. I eased forward and then headed downstream on the frozen carpet. Hell, this river probably goes back down toward the little white house and the Green Meadow Bridge. For all I know, this is the very river that goes under the Green Meadow Bridge. I slowly gained speed as I learned how to slow spin the tires for traction and started to cover some ground. Maybe ground is not exactly the right word. Ahead I saw a black crescent across the white belt of the river and slowed before going over a small waterfall. It was about 3 feet in total elevation, and the ice had melted off it because of moving water underneath. What the hell? The layered slate was angled about 45 degrees, and I hadn't come this far to stop now. I took a modest start and just crashed down the drop and continued on. There was quite a scrape on the bottom of the Rambler, but I had already bounced off stuff harder than that. I moved on, easing into the curves early, like in a big, wide, green canoe. In time, I saw the green metal bridge ahead in the half-light and realized there wasn't enough space to clear under with the Rambler. A girder would take off the top of the car. The riverbank along the road was a few feet high and pretty steep, and it housed a fine bed of orange daylilies in season. I still had speed, and I just aimed the nose at the flattest part and gunned up the side like a Nile crocodile lunging after a careless tourist. Molly and I spun into the middle of the country road I had turned off previously to take on the big hill. As I sat there, a light came on in the second floor landing of the little white house. I swear I saw an elderly gentleman in a Grimm's fairy tale nightgown holding a candle up in one hand and peering out to see what the ruckus was. Without a wave, I simply headed on down the road toward Route 13 and the flat way around the hill. I delivered the rest of the tubes in the valley and dropped the bales of papers to the stores on the far side and headed back to town to pick up my pay. And nobody that I ever heard of up on the hill ever called in to complain. Maybe the phone lines were down because of the storm. Maybe they got an automatic message when they called in. I'm sorry, your connection to the complaint desk at the Ithaca Journal cannot be completed at this time. Please call again later. To hell with them. That's the story. That's how the story ends. And I'm here to tell you, if you're one of the people who didn't get your paper that Sunday morning in February 1968, I am the one man who is still alive who can tell you it couldn't be done.